In this video, I'll show you how to make a stacked bar chart for a pivot table or a contingency table. So first thing to do would be to make a pivot table. I created one using our data set. I cleaned up the data set, make sure that there were no blank spaces across any of the rows, that I only had data and that my words were consistent. For example, in this example, I have female with a capital F, M with a capital male, non-binary, capitals N and B, so that we only have those three categories. After you've made your pivot table, you need to select your data. So we select all the way from the corner label down to the bottom row. You don't need to select the grand totals. You can play around with it. You can add and delete those later on if you choose. But the important part is that you have the bulk of the table and then that header row and then that header column. Then we'll go to Insert, Chart, and automatically it's going to make a chart for you. But what I found is that most of the time this chart is wrong, so we need to go through and edit it and make some changes. So the things that I notice that are not always correct is that the label down on the axis doesn't necessarily match your labels along this axis, nor does it match the categories across the top, and then the title is always wrong. So we're going to go one by one and switch all of those. So what I do notice is that the number 1 is cut off. So on my attitude towards math, I'm not seeing the category 1. And so sometimes what I found is if you click on the switch rows and columns, you can end up kind of gaining back those categories or switching off and on the use row 2 as headers. There we go. I unchecked that box and I got my number 1 back. But one thing I did lose was my categories across the top. I don't know what those meant. So I believe I have to click back on them, and now they're back and they match. So quirk. Now, one thing I can tell is if I have this correct, I should be able to go and hover over any of these categories and it will show what the category is and then what the count is. So female 7 blue, so it looks like up here in this contingency table, yes, there's with the number 1 that are female, there's 7 of them, so that's right there. And same thing, I can check the non-binary. Looks like there's 1 person in each category. They scored an 8 and a 9. So it looks like, yeah, 8 and 9. My variables here are on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your attitude towards math? 1 is the don't like it, and then 10 was the love it, and then the gender was the other variable. Okay, so now that my axis labels are, the digits are matching the label, and then my category colors are matching here across the top, I would want to go through and I'd want to change the title. So it looks like I have grouped everybody by their attitude towards math. So I would end up calling this a table, gender grouped by math attitude. Another thing I can do about this graph is change the way it looks. So right now I have each category as one column, but a useful way to look at this is instead of in the setup, make the stacking, instead of standard, turn it to 100%. And what this is good for, so when you have a whole lot of data and you don't really care about the category counts anymore, you just want to know out of 100%, what portion are this, what portion are that, the 100% stacking will do the job. So then you can go to any of these categories and say, okay, the people who loved math, how did they sort of fill out? It looks like we have, so blue is female, so of the people who really love math, a little less than 3/4 are female, and then a little more than 1/4 are male. And then I can look at that across the categories and start to find patterns, if there are any. Now, if you want to do this backwards, where you have a different variable along the bottom. So this is the variable, the attitude towards math. You could switch the rows and columns like that. And now your x-axis label has changed, but so has like everything else in this graph. So I found sometimes it's best to just start over and fresh and then make your graph instead of trying to manipulate everything. But we'll go ahead and just try this out anyways. So my data range of my chart, let's see, let's make sure that's the same. A2 to D12, A2 down to D12, that looks good. Use my columns, use column A as headers. So column A is the 1 through 10. Yep, I have the 1 through 10 down on the legend. Use row 2 as labels. Yep, I have my 3 categories. I have female, male, non-binary. Now let's make sure that this makes sense. So in my non-binary group, I knew I had an 8 and a 9 score. Looking over at the pivot table, and then looking at the legend, yep, there's an 8 and a 9. And then my other categories here. So this was a pink, it was a 10. Let's see if we can get this to hover over. Oh, there we go, finally. So there's 3 people in that 10 category and male. So yeah, 3 males, 10. Okay, this looks good. But our problem is this legend. So we can go to the axis chart and axis titles, and then we can click through each one. So we can change the chart title and then fill it in. So now we have math attitude. Grouped by gender. Okay. Now I'm going to change the horizontal axis title. My question was, what is your gender? Oh, that's right. I believe Google Sheets doesn't like, oh, there it is. There's my question mark. That worked fine. I thought sometimes Google Sheets doesn't like question marks, but it seems to be okay. And then our legend over here is the scale from 1 to 10. We could also put in a subtitle to our table, to our chart, and maybe put in 1 through 10s. So there you go. You can now make graphs, stacked bar charts from data in a pivot table.